Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. In a white hospital room, there's a vase with a single white rose. Perfect, controlled, a promise and a threat pressed into one symbol from President Snow. But you remember another plant, a scruffy yellow dandelion in a District 12 schoolyard, burned into Katniss's memory because Peeta once tossed her bread. One flower means, I own you. The other whispers, you might survive this. So here's the real question. How does the man who weaponizes symbols for a living completely miss the power of the boy who lives by them? At face value, the story seems simple. Snow fears Katniss, the girl on fire, the mockingjay. She's the obvious symbol, the one filling screens in every district, the one whose dress literally turns into wings. Peeta, in that version, is the love interest collateral, the boy with the bread, the one the narrative can hurt to motivate the heroine. But if Snow is this master strategist, the man who sees every tribute as a piece on a board, why does he misread the one player who actually understands stories and people better than he does? This is where we talk about Peeta as Snow's blind spot. Not because Peeta is weak, but because his weapons don't look like weapons inside Snow's worldview. Snow can predict hunger, he can predict ambition. He definitely knows how to predict fear. That's the entire games in one formula. You starve the districts, you dangle the promise of a victor's life, you make every child watch. But what do you do with a boy whose main tools are empathy, authenticity, and narrative intelligence? That part matters because those traits don't fit into Snow's usual equation, so he keeps trying to treat Peeta like a standard piece. And the system keeps glitching. Think about the very first interviews. Peeta is the one who weaponizes the stage, not the capital. He invents the star-crossed lovers narrative before Katniss even knows the script. Snow reads it as a shallow romance he can exploit, when in reality, it forces the games to keep both tributes alive. Already, his read is just slightly off. We're going to cover how that tiny miscalculation keeps compounding. In the Quarter Quell, Peeta's proposal and his speeches humanize the tributes, when Snow wants them back as monsters. During the hijacking, Snow still reaches for pain and fear, convinced that if he breaks Peeta's mind, he breaks Katniss's hope. But what happens when the part of Peeta that matters most isn't his fear response? It's his relationship to truth and to people. There is a lot to uncover here, so we're going to track the interviews, the alliances, the torture, and the choices Peeta makes after hijacking, moment by moment, where Snow's understanding is just a few degrees off. Because in a system this tightly controlled, a few degrees is all it takes for one overlooked boy to break the game. Known Snow's Game versus Peeta's Game, why this misread matters. And that overlooked boy line is exactly where we talk about Snow's operating system. Snow runs the capital on a very simple equation. If you control pain and pleasure, you control people. Hunger, whippings, bombings, luxury trains, victory tours. The inputs change, but the principle doesn't. He assumes human behavior is basically predictable if the rewards are shiny enough and the punishments brutal enough. You fear the games, you crave the victor's life, you stay in line. At face value, it works. Districts send tributes, crowds cheer, the arena delivers blood and spectacle on schedule. From Snow's perspective, emotions are just levers. Love is a weakness, fear is a leash, hope is a rationed commodity he can dial up or down. That part matters because it explains why he keeps going back to the same tools: bombs, whips, roses, poison, no matter what the rebellion throws at him. Peeta is running a completely different program. He's in the same games, but he's not playing for the same prize. When he tells Caesar he wants to show the capital they don't own me, that's his whole strategy in one line. He's not fighting just to crawl out of the arena alive. He's fighting to stay himself, to protect Katniss, and to control the story people remember. The interviews, the star-crossed lovers, the way he humanizes other tributes in the Quarterquell, these aren't random emotional outbursts, they're narrative moves. So here's the real question. Why does a dictator obsessed with television and spectacle completely miss the one tribute who actually understands story better than he does? Watch where Snow aims his blows. He targets Katniss's body, her family, her physical safety. He threatens Gale's whipping, bombs District 12, turns every arena into a direct assault on her survival. But why does he keep underestimating Peeta's impact on hearts and minds? Why double down on torture and hijacking instead of trying to co-opt Peeta's narrative skill? Why assume that if you break Peeta's love for Katniss, you automatically break the rebellion's hope? The reason is Snow's definition of victory. For Snow, victory is structural. The games continue, the capital system holds, the districts stay terrified enough to obey, but hopeful enough to keep playing. As long as the show goes on, he thinks he's winning. For Peeta, victory is internal, refusing to become what the games want him to be. If he can stay kind, stay honest, refuse to let them turn him into a monster, he's already beaten Snow's design, even if he dies. That clash is why Snow keeps thinking he's ahead when he's actually losing. Every time Peeta uses an interview to protect Katniss, or a speech to humanize the victors, or even post-hijacking claws his way back to the truth, he's proving there's a kind of power Snow's fear calculus can't measure. And there is a lot to uncover here, because once you see that blind spot, the political thesis of the whole series snaps into focus. Dictators who only understand fear will always misread people whose power comes from connection and story. So how does that misread play out, moment by moment, from the first interview to the final execution vote? And why does Peeta, of all people, become the test case that breaks Snow's game? We're going to cover that next. Our lens today: Peeta as Snow's greatest strategic error. So in this section, we're going to flip the board. Up to now, Snow has been the master strategist, Katniss the unpredictable spark. But here's the real question. What happens when you treat Peeta not as Katniss's +1, but as Snow's single biggest strategic error? At face value, Snow thinks he's solved Peeta from day one. The boy with the bread is a soft-hearted romantic from a poor district, hopelessly in love, easy to threaten, easy to use. He reads Peeta as an accessory, a pressure point on Katniss's heart, and a convenient prop for the capital's favorite genre, tragic romance. with great ratings. That part matters, because once Snow files Peeta under leverage, he stops checking whether Peeta might be running his own game. This is where we talk about our lens. We're not going to cover Peeta as the soft one, while Katniss is the fighter. Instead, we're going to track him as the storyteller in a world ruled by spectacle. In a system where the games, the interviews, the victory tour, even the victor's village, are all about image, Peeta is the one tribute who actually understands stories better than the Capitol does. He doesn't just survive narratives, he authors them. Think about that first interview in the 74th Games. Snow believes he's watching a love confession that hands him perfect romantic leverage. But Peeta is quietly doing something else. He's forcing the Capitol to care whether he and Katniss live or die. Love, in Snow's model, is a weakness you dangle over someone's head. In Peeta's model, it's a shield you hold up so publicly that killing you becomes politically expensive. There is a lot to uncover here. Over and over, Snow assumes kindness, vulnerability, and emotional honesty are exploitable flaws. Peeta keeps turning them into weapons that box the Capitol in. The star-crossed lovers stunt in the arena. The quarter-quell proposal that makes the old victors feel human instead of monstrous. Even his later broken interviews during the hijacking arc still revolve around one thing. People are watching, and what they feel will decide which choices Snow can safely make. So why does this misread matter so much? Because Snow keeps reaching for the wrong tools. When Peeta humanizes tributes, Snow tries to reassert control with more fear, more pain, more hijacking. But you can't torture away the memory of a story that made you care. You can only prove, again, that you don't understand why people followed it in the first place. And that brings us to the guiding question for the rest of this breakdown. If Snow had actually understood Peeta's real skill set, his ability to read a room, craft a narrative, and make both districts and Capitol citizens emotionally invested, could he have stopped the star-crossed lovers from ever becoming a revolution? Or was Peeta's way of playing the game always going to slip through the cracks of a system built only on fear and spectacle? That's what we'll trace, moment by moment, from those first interviews to Peeta's final vote on coin. Roadmap through the arena. How we're breaking this down. So to actually answer that, we need a roadmap. Because Snow misreading Peeta isn't just one bad call in one games, it's a pattern. It's baked into how he thinks power works. First, we're going to cover Snow's worldview. The man who poisons his enemies and trims his roses does not believe in surprises. In his head, tributes are predictable, hungry, terrified, ambitious in very narrow, very controllable ways. You dangle survival, you dangle status, and they perform. That's his mental model. Then we put Peeta next to that, this soft-spoken baker's son, whose real weapons are empathy, authenticity, and what we can call narrative intelligence. This is where we talk about Peeta as counter-programming. Snow builds a system that assumes people will sell each other out for one more day of life. Peeta walks in and keeps choosing connection over self-preservation. And somehow, that makes him more effective, not less. Why does that short-circuit Snow's read of him? Why does kindness, of all things, become the glitch in a fear-based operating system? There is a lot to uncover here. We'll track it chronologically so you can feel where Snow's grip slips. In the 74th Games, Peeta hijacks the interviews first, tossing out the star-crossed lover story before Katniss even knows she's in that narrative. At face value, Snow thinks it's sentimental fluff he can monetize. We'll pause there and ask, what happens when the dictator assumes romance is a weakness, but the tribute uses it as a shield that forces the capital to keep them both alive? Then we move into Catching Fire. Peeta's proposal, his speeches about the other victors as people with families and histories, are Snow's worst PR nightmare disguised as good television. We'll look at how, round after round, Snow keeps reading Peeta as an accessory to Katniss instead of a player rewriting the rules of the arena's story. Why does that misread matter when the quarter quell is announced? When the rebellion starts coalescing around symbols, the capital itself broadcast. From there, we dive into Mockingjay and the hijacking. Snow goes back to his favorite tools: pain, fear, chemical conditioning. He tries to burn Peeta's love for Katniss out of him. But here's the real question. What if the thing that made Peeta dangerous was never just his feelings, but his ability to make other people feel? We'll trace how, even broken and weaponized, he keeps dragging the story back toward truth and moral choice. We'll also have a meta segment comparing book Peeta and Snow to their movie versions. Why does downplaying Peeta's narrative savvy in the films make Snow's error look smaller? And what do we lose when his strategic empathy gets trimmed down to a standard love interest arc? And then, at the end, we're going speculative. Alternate timeline. What if Snow actually understood Peeta from the start and treated him as the main threat instead of Katniss? How do the games change? How does the media campaign shift if the capital is trying to silence the boy who understands stories better than they do? That part matters because in our closing synthesis, we're looping back to that white rose versus dandelion image and asking whether Peeta, not Katniss, is the one who truly breaks Snow's theory of power. And if that's true, why does Snow never see him coming until it's far too late? Welcome to the arena of analysis, channel context and how we do this. So if you're hearing all this and thinking, wait, we're really arguing that Peeta is the real glitch in Snow's system, yes, that's exactly what this channel does. We live in Panem year-round. We don't just rewatch the games. We pick apart the wiring under the arena floor. This is where we talk about character psychology, political design, and all the weird little details the Capitol camera crews glide past. At face value, you're watching a love triangle and some very sharp arrows. Underneath, you're watching a dictator test a theory about human behavior and a baker's son quietly disproving it every time he opens his mouth. So what are we going to cover here, not just in this video, but across the channel? We treat the Hunger Games as a designed system. Every rule of the reaping, every mutation, every interview question is a choice made by someone in power. Snow, Plutarch, Seneca, Coin. Then we track how people like Katniss and Peeta bend or break those choices in ways the system didn't predict. That means we're not just recapping, then Peeta says he's in love with her. We're asking, why does that confession land harder in the Capitol than any threat of an arrow? Why does Snow keep doubling down on roses and blood when Peeta keeps winning with stories and bread? There is a lot to uncover here when you stop treating scenes as romance beats and start treating them as competing propaganda strategies. Style-wise, expect a conversational tone, but lore-heavy. We'll quote the text. We'll pause on a single line, Snow telling Seneca, "A little hope is effective," and then compare how the film frames that against Peeta's on-air proposal in Catching Fire. We'll look at book-only details, like Peeta's prosthetic leg or the way his hijacking is described from Katniss's point of view, and ask what those details reveal about Snow's worldview. Here's the real question. If Snow believes people are predictable under fear and hunger, what happens when he meets someone who keeps choosing empathy even when every incentive says don't? That's the thread we pull, over and over. From Peeta joining the careers to protect Katniss, to his speech on the beach about having no games left, to the hijacked version of him that still, somehow, finds his way back. If you're a Peeta defender, a Snow apologist, or someone who thinks Katniss either gets way too much or not nearly enough credit, you're in the right district. We're building a little Victor's village of overthinkers here. People who want to know not just what happens, but why the system allowed it to happen in the first place. And the payoff for all this? Once you see how we dissect Panem's machinery, it becomes a lot easier to understand our main claim today. Snow's biggest strategic error wasn't misreading Katniss's bow, it was misreading Peeta's words. Next, we're going into the arena itself to trace the first moment Snow files Peeta under harmless and why that mislabeling haunts him all the way to Mockingjay, inside Snow's head. The dictator who thinks he knows you. So let's step away from the arena for a second and go somewhere much colder. Because if you don't understand how he thinks people work, you can't see why Peeta breaks his system. This is where we talk about the dictator who honestly believes he can forecast your every move the way Seneca Crane designs a firestorm. Go back to that garden scene in the first film, or the conversations in the books where Snow lectures Seneca. He doesn't rant about ideology. He talks about control, about fear, about the slightest hint of hope as a tool. At face value, he's giving Seneca career advice. But here's the real question. What is he revealing about his model of human nature? For Snow, people are ruled by three things: fear, hunger, and self-preservation. That's it. You keep the districts starving, you parade the games as a reminder, you publicly execute anyone who steps out of line. You offer Victor's village, parties, and immunity as a counterweight. Pain and pleasure, whippings in the square, then a Victor's feast. That part matters because he genuinely believes if you tune those dials, you can predict almost every choice a person will make. We see it in how he talks about hope to Seneca. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. But he immediately adds that it has to be contained. Why? Because in his head, hope is just another dosage level. Too little, the districts revolt from despair. Too much, they revolt from courage. The games are his prescription. And the spectacle is the math. There is a lot to uncover here. The arena turns raw terror into entertainment, which means you get millions of people all responding to the same stimuli in public. Starving kids, they will scramble for the cornucopia. Ambitious careers, they will volunteer, they will kill for glory, they will form packs. Broken victors, they will drink, they will perform, or they will be quietly removed. Over time, Snow stops seeing tributes as individuals. He reads them as archetypes in a predictable script. Think about how he categorizes them. Rue is the fragile innocent. Cato is the brutal career. Finnick is the weaponized heartthrob. Haymitch is the decayed warning. In his relationship to each, Snow toggles the same controls: reward, threat, humiliation, indulgence. We're going to cover how Victor's village fits this, but the core is the same. He assumes everyone will bend towards survival once you squeeze hard enough. So when Katniss volunteers, he files her under protective sister, high leverage. Dangerous, but still legible. When she pulls out the berries, he doesn't see romance. He sees a mutiny of incentives. His response? More pain, more spectacle. The quarter quell. And here's the disturbing part. For most of Panem, his model works. People do break. They do sell out. They do cling to whatever the capital promises, which sets up our real problem for Snow. Peeta Mellark keeps choosing against fear, against hunger, and against his own self-preservation. To a man who thinks people are equations, Peeta isn't just inconvenient. He's bad data. So what happens when bad data starts rewriting the story on live television? Peeta's real superpower, empathy as a weapon Snow doesn't recognize. Snow thinks in numbers. Peeta thinks in people. This is where we talk about Peeta's real superpower, the one Snow never even enters into the equation. Empathy. Not the soft, hallmark version, the tactical version. From the moment he tosses that burnt bread to a starving girl in the rain, you're seeing his baseline. He notices pain, he adjusts around it, and he's willing to pay a cost for someone else's relief. That part matters, because it's pre-games, pre-cameras, pre-reward. There is no audience, just a boy making a choice Snow would call irrational. Fast forward to the arena, and nothing about that core has changed. When Rue dies, Katniss honors her with flowers. Peeta's first thought after is, what about Rue's family? He's already imagining the district on the other side of the screen. The mother who has to watch. Who does that in the middle of a death match? Someone whose instinct is to expand the circle of who counts, even when the games are trying to shrink it to you or them. But here's the real question. How does that turn into strategy? Because Peeta's not just nice, he's precise. At face value, teaming up with the careers looks random or weak. In reality, he's reading their motives, glory, cruelty, boredom, and sliding himself into the one spot where he can misdirect them away from Katniss. Later, he shifts fully to Katniss, then to the victors in the quarter quell, always recalibrating around people's fears and needs. He isn't the strongest tribute, but he is the one who understands the emotional weather of every room. Any victor will tell you the games are about weapons. Peeta quietly swaps out blades for relationships. In the quell, he uses interviews to humanize the tributes, turning supposed monsters back into neighbors your district might know. He proposes on live television, not as a scripted stunt, but as a real extension of how he feels. And that sincerity forces the capital audience to invest in him. Why execute the boy who just promised a future and a baby to the girl on stage? Why cheer for their deaths when you've already cried for their wedding? Snow expects tributes to be self-interested. That's the whole design. Hunger, fear, ambition. Those are his reliable variables. So when Peeta keeps choosing Katniss's survival over his own, keeps protecting other tributes' dignity, keeps talking directly to the capital viewers' hearts, Snow reads it as either manipulation or weakness. In his worldview, kindness is always a cover story. But Peeta's most subversive move is that he tells the truth. He really does love Katniss. He really is horrified by the games. He really does want the capital to see them as people. And he weaponizes those truths at exactly the right moments, boxing Snow into a narrative corner where killing them both becomes politically expensive. So what happens when a dictator builds a system on curated lies, and the most dangerous person in the arena is the one who means every word he says? The first plot twist: how Peeta hijacks the 74th game's interviews. So what happens when a dictator builds a system on curated lies, and the most dangerous person in the arena is the one who means every word he says? You get the 74th game's interviews. On Caesar Flickerman's stage, everything is supposed to be safe chaos. The lights, the spinning chairs, the screaming Capitol audience who treat trauma as a talent show. By this point, Snow thinks he understands the pattern. Each tribute performs one of a few reliable roles. You cry through a tragic district backstory, you brag about how you'll win the games, or you act terrified so the Capitol can feel merciful for a night. At face value, it's harmless spectacle. But here's the real question. What happens when a tribute stops auditioning for survival and starts writing the narrative itself? This is where we talk about Peeta's first real hijack. Snow expects Katniss to be the unpredictable one. He's watching the girl on fire, the defiant salute, the near-perfect score. Peeta, in his mind, is an accessory, the boy with the bread, the backup singer in Katniss's tragedy. So when Peeta sits down and with that calm, earnest tone drops the "because she came here with me" confession, he detonates the script before Katniss even knows there was one. In a single answer, he reframes the entire games. They're no longer two separate tributes from District 12. They're a unit, star-crossed lovers in an arena designed to destroy relationships. The audience doesn't just root for Katniss or Peeta anymore. They root for the promise that both might somehow survive a system built to guarantee the opposite. That part matters because Peeta isn't just being romantic, he's strategic. By making their relationship public and emotional on Capitol terms, he builds a shield Snow never authorized. Killing one of them now isn't just routine violence. It's bad television, it tanks ratings, it risks sympathy, it introduces a dangerous question into living rooms. Why must hope always lose? And Snow completely misreads it. From his perspective, this is perfect leverage, teen infatuation. Wonderful. You can threaten one to control the other. You can parade them on future victory tours. You can turn their love into a long-running show. He assumes Peeta is a passive piece, overwhelmed by feelings the Capitol can weaponize later. What he doesn't clock is that Peeta understands the audience almost better than Caesar does. He knows the Capitol is addicted to stories, not swords. So he uses honesty as armor, trusting that once millions of viewers invest in this romance, the games themselves become constrained by that investment. There is a lot to uncover here, because from this moment on, Snow is playing catch-up. He keeps trying to separate them, threaten them, twist the romance into a leash. But what if he never realizes the core problem? He's fighting the plot while the boy with the bread is the one who wrote the script. And once you miss who's actually holding the pen, every move you make to fix the story only makes it stronger. Pieces on the board. Why Snow files Peeta under leverage, not threat. So this is where we talk about Snow's filing cabinet. Not the physical one on his desk, but the mental one where every tribute, every victor, every district gets sorted into a neat little folder. Katniss, she's under symbol. She's the girl on fire, the problem you can see from space. Haymitch goes under corruptible mentor, the drunk you can threaten with more victors to train and more trauma to drown in. Sinner is stylist artist, Dangerous only because art can shift the story if you don't keep it on a leash. And Peeta gets misfiled. He doesn't go into threat, he goes into leverage. The emotional weak point, useful but not central. At face value, Snow reads him as the boy you kidnap, not the boy you study. Here's the real question. What happens when a dictator decides you're a pressure point instead of a player? You stop being worth his best analysts. You're not a motive to understand. You're a hostage to move closer or farther from the girl who actually scares him. You can see this in the text. Snow's direct confrontations are always with Katniss. On the balcony in Catching Fire, he doesn't say, "Peeta is dangerous." He says, "Convince me you're in love. Convince the districts, or the people you love, your mother, your sister, Gale, will suffer." When Peeta comes up, it's as something to be taken from her. Would you like to be in the arena again, Katniss? With him? The threat is losing Peeta, not Peeta's own potential to destabilize the games. That part matters because strategy follows perception. If you think someone is leverage, you don't burn capital resources mapping their independent motives. You don't ask, why does this baker's son keep hijacking the narrative on live television? You just move him on and off the board to manage Katniss's behavior. Meanwhile, Peeta is not behaving like a hostage. He's shaping public opinion in those interviews long before Katniss even understands there is a script. In the first games, he drops the star-crossed lovers bomb and instantly reframes their relationship as a romance the Capitol can't resist. In the Quarter Quell, he's comforting tributes, charming Caesar, becoming the Capitol's favorite POV on Katniss's heart. We're going to cover how he turns every interview into a referendum on what a human life is worth. But even early on, he's already nudging the audience toward empathy instead of spectacle. There is a lot to uncover here, because Snow's whole worldview is built on fear, hunger, and predictable reactions. He understands ambition, he understands terror. What he doesn't understand is Peeta's combination of empathy and narrative intelligence. He doesn't have a folder for kindness as weapon. So when the Quarter Quell rolls around, and Peeta stops just talking about love and starts talking directly to the Capitol about memory, death, and the value of human life, Snow is already several moves behind. And the next time Peeta opens his mouth on that stage, he doesn't just bend the story, he breaks Snow's game in half. Catching Fire, Catching Feelings, Peeta's proposal as political sabotage. Peeta doesn't swing a sword. He walks on stage in a suit and detonates the Quarter Quell with a story. Remember Snow's goal here. This quell is damage control. After the berries, the Capitol needs to prove that victors are not symbols, not martyrs, not people you could ever have a real relationship with. They're weapons on a shelf that the Capitol can pull down, reuse, and throw away. At face value, reaping from the pool of victors is Snow saying, "You are mine forever." But here's the real question. If the whole point is to turn beloved victors back into monsters, why does Peeta walk out and start talking about wedding plans? This is where we talk about his interview strategy. He doesn't just propose, he paints a future. He gives Caesar and the audience details they can emotionally invest in. The ring, the ceremony, the promise that there will be a life after the games. Then he pushes it further. He talks about children, about wanting them, about what kind of father he'd be. There is a lot to uncover here, because he's quietly shifting the frame from tributes as entertainment to tributes as people with futures you're about to steal, and then he rips it away. Katniss is pregnant. One sentence, no arena, no mutts, just a narrative twist that hits harder than any cannon. Suddenly, every Capitol viewer who has ever cooed over a baby in a designer stroller is implicated. You're not just watching a games anymore, you're watching the state execute a supposed mother and her unborn child. That part matters because Snow's entire system depends on distance, on you forgetting that the people in the arena could be you, or your kid, or your neighbor from the nicer side of the district. Snow wanted the Quell to remonstrify the victors, to remind the districts that even their heroes are capital property. Instead, Peeta makes them parents, lovers, people with photo albums that will never be filled. Why fear a threat when you're too busy greeting a family you've been told to adore for 2 books and a movie? And here's Snow's miscalculation. He thinks controlling the arena and the rulebook is enough. He believes fear, not empathy, is the most predictable human response. But Peeta understands something Snow doesn't. If you change what the audience feels, you change what the games mean. With a few sentences, he turns the Quell from a triumphant flex into a public relations disaster. Pattern interrupt for you. In this moment, Katniss isn't the main destabilizer. Peeta is. She shoots arrows, he shoots guilt. He makes the Capitol mourn its own complicity on live TV. And Snow will spend the rest of the story trying and failing to put that narrative back in its cage. The beach, the bomb, and the binary Snow can't see past. So when you cut from that interview stage to the Quarter Quell beach, you're watching Snow's worst nightmare without him even realizing it. On paper, it's simple. 2 victors, 1 arena, 1 doomed romance. But here's the real question. What exactly is Peeta doing in that sand that Snow's entire system has no language for? On the beach, Peeta doesn't bargain. He bequeaths. He hands Katniss that locket stuffed with photos of Prim, her mother, Gale. Basically a visual contract that says, "These are your reasons to live, not mine." At face value, it plays as a tragic lover's farewell, the dying boy who wants the girl to move on. You've seen that scene in 100 other stories, right? But there is a lot to uncover here once you remember who's supposedly watching. A president who built his power on predicting the most basic human instinct, self-preservation. Snow's whole game's philosophy is brutally simple. Push people hard enough, and they'll choose their own survival or their own power every time. That's the binary he trusts. Fear on one side, ambition on the other. The arena is a lab designed to prove that over and over, turning every tribute into data that confirms his worldview. You grab the weapon, you grab the alliance, you grab the chance to live. Even if it means someone else dies. That part matters because it's the quiet promise the Capitol makes to every district. If you're ruthless enough, you might win. Peeta walks onto that beach and politely declines the offer. He's not saying, "Save me." He's saying, "Use me." He talks about how her survival gives the districts hope, how she's become the symbol that might end the games. Then he actively tries to engineer conditions where he dies and Katniss walks out. He gives her the knife, the emotional permission, the narrative justification. This is where we talk about why Snow can't process him. Peeta isn't choosing fear or ambition. He's choosing relationship and meaning. And Snow's model doesn't have a column for that. And here's the twist Snow misses. Peeta's self-sacrifice doesn't just move Katniss emotionally, it moves the board strategically. Her instant refusal to let him die is what locks her into the alliance she doesn't know exists yet. She has to keep Peeta alive, which keeps her tethered to Finnick, Beatty, Johanna, the entire escape plan the rebels have built around those two victors. Snow thinks he's watching a messy love triangle between Katniss, Peeta, and Gale. What he's actually watching is a coordinated extraction he can't read, because its engine isn't fear, it's trust. That beach is the moment his data should have broken. A tribute who keeps choosing someone else's life over his own. That's a crack in the foundation. But instead of updating his understanding of Peeta, Snow falls back on the only tool he believes in: pain. And the next time we see Peeta, that beach promise has been turned inside out in a way that will haunt both of them and completely redefine what the games can do to a mind. Snow's old tools, new problem. Why hijacking Peeta still misses the point. Hijacking is Snow taking that beach promise and running it through a meat grinder. In universe, it's not just torture. It's chemistry as a weapon. Tracker-jacker venom doesn't erase memories, it corrupts them. It takes the neural pathways where comfort lived and reroutes them into terror. So every time Peeta remembers Katniss reaching for him, his brain screams monster. This is where we talk about how old tools get repackaged as new strategy. The Capitol already used tracker-jackers in the arena to manufacture chaos. Snow's upgrade is to use the same venom in a controlled lab over and over until Peeta's love story is rewritten as a horror story. At face value, it's brilliant in that cold capital way. Why kill the symbol when you can turn the symbol against itself? Here's the real question. What does that tell you about how Snow thinks people work? In his logic, if Katniss's weakness is Peeta, then corrupting that relationship is the perfect move. Take the boy who kept pulling her back from the edge and make him the one pushing her off it. Put him on camera, shaking and furious, accusing her of being a capital-made threat to every district. Broadcast that on every screen. The reason is simple in Snow's mind. If Peeta says she's dangerous, the audience will believe him, because they've always believed him. But there is a lot to uncover here about that assumption. Snow is still treating Peeta as an accessory, an emotional pressure point attached to Katniss, not a victor with his own independent gravity. He thinks Peeta's power begins and ends with who he loves. He doesn't factor in Peeta's moral compass, the way he refused to play the game straight, or how his empathy made even Capitol viewers feel human instead of complicit. That part matters, because once people trust your sincerity, they don't stop just because you're suddenly screaming on cue. Watch those hijacked interviews again. Snow wants a rational critic dismantling the Mockingjay. What he actually puts on air is a visibly broken prisoner. The shaking hands, the hoarse voice, the wild-eyed terror. None of that reads as calm truth-teller. It reads as, "This is what the Capitol does to a boy who loved bread and painted camouflage." So instead of discrediting Katniss, he accidentally spotlights his own cruelty. Rebels don't say, "Wow, Peeta's right." They say, "We have to get him out." And even inside Peeta's mind, the plan doesn't fully stick. Torture can scramble associations, but it can't quite erase the underlying pattern of who he is. He still asks questions. He still tries to sort real from not real. His instinct isn't domination, it's accuracy. That's the part Snow never understood. Peeta's real threat isn't just that he loves Katniss, it's that he changes how people feel about themselves. Capitol audiences, fellow tributes, even Katniss, by offering a different story than the one Snow wrote. You can hijack memories, you can't fully hijack that. And when that starts to resurface in District 13, even through the venom, Snow's entire fear-based system meets something it can't cleanly overwrite. Hope that remembers itself. Post-hijacking Peeta, the variable Snow didn't plan for. Hope that remembers itself is exactly what Snow didn't plan for. Because when Peeta comes back from the capital, he is, on paper, Snow's masterpiece. The hijacking works. The boy with the bread now wants to kill the girl on fire. At face value, that should be the end of the story. Right. The perfect warning. Rebel. And we'll turn your own victors into weapons against you. But here's the real question. If Snow won Peeta, why does Peeta keep slipping out of his script? This is where we talk about that recovery arc in District 13. You watch him in those early scenes, strapped to a hospital bed, flinching at Katniss's face, reciting capital narratives about her being a mutt. The games never left him. They just moved into his bloodstream. Yet even then, there is a lot to uncover here. His first instinct after attacking her isn't triumph, it's horror. He's confused, ashamed, begging for answers he can't quite reach. Snow's model says fear plus pain equals obedience, but Peeta responds with questions. Constant questions when he joins the Star Squad, still unstable, still unsure what's real. He doesn't become Coin's clean propaganda piece either. He asks Katniss on camera in front of the whole unit, what's our actual mission? Are we really going to kill Snow? What if this is just another performance for another capital? That part matters because it's not capital loyalty speaking, it's relational ethics trying to reboot. He's not defending Snow, he's interrogating everyone. Katniss, Coin, the rebellion's promise. He's basically saying, if I'm going to die again for someone's story, I need to know whose and why. And Snow has no category for that. In his world, you're either his or you're the enemy. A hijacked victor is supposed to be a binary tool. Attack Katniss, praise the capital. End of equation. Instead, Peeta is this moving variable, calling Katniss a murderer one minute, then throwing himself in harm's way to save the squad the next. How do you predict someone who will criticize your symbol of hope and still choose to protect her when the mutts attack? We're going to cover more of this in the next section, but notice the pattern already. Even when his memories lie, his reflex to shield others keeps surfacing. He warns the squad about pods. He volunteers to be the one left behind. He keeps trying to choose the least monstrous option, even when he's not sure who the monster is. Snow's entire toolset, poison, torture, binary loyalty tests, assumes people are driven by self-preservation or ambition. Peeta isn't. His driving force is relationship. That's the one thing you can't fully hijack with Venom, and it's why Snow's neat categories start to fall apart the moment Peeta steps back onto the board. The storyteller versus the showrunner. Who really controls the narrative? Snow thinks in grids. Arenas, schedules, broadcasts, quotas of fear per district. In his mind, if you own the cameras, you own the truth. If you can cut away from a dying tribute and cut to fireworks over the capital, you've controlled what the country is allowed to feel. But here's the real question. If you control the lens, do you automatically control the story? Or can someone standing inside that frame quietly hijack it with nothing but words? This is where we talk about Snow as showrunner versus Peeta as storyteller. At face value, Snow is the ultimate showrunner of the games. He signs off on the arena design, he approves the mutts, he greenlights the rule changes and the twists in every quarter quell. He oversees the editing, the reaction shots, the anthem playing at just the right moment. To him, narrative is infrastructure. You build a system and the story flows downward through it, like water. Peeta doesn't own a single camera. He can't cut to commercial. He can't change the rules of the games. But he owns something Snow cannot confiscate: his framing, his reactions, his willingness to tell the audience why what they're seeing should matter. Look at the first major beat he controls, the star-crossed lover's confession. On Caesar's stage, Peeta takes a generic tribute interview and detonates it. Suddenly, the games aren't just 24 kids dying, they're the story of one boy who has always loved one girl. Snow wanted a spectacle. Peeta gives him a romance that makes killing either of them politically expensive. Then in Catching Fire, we're going to cover the quarter quell proposal. Snow expects trauma, maybe resentment. Peeta offers a promise. He kneels on that stage and turns the returning tributes into future parents, into potential families, into a generation that might have existed if the Capitol weren't dragging them back. That part matters because it humanizes every victor on screen in real time. The crowd doesn't see threats, they see stolen futures. He keeps doing this. In interviews, Peeta insists on naming other tributes, praising their skills, their kindness, their histories. He refuses to let them flatten back into career and enemy. And later, when he talks openly about his nightmares, his doubt, his fear that the rebellion is using him, he's still doing narrative work. He's telling the Capitol audience and the districts that trauma is real and that honesty is possible even inside propaganda. Snow's core misread is simple. He thinks narrative is a top-down weapon. You beam propaganda at people. They absorb it. Peeta treats narrative as a relationship. You offer the truth in a way that makes people care, and then you listen to how they respond. Here's the pattern interrupt. By the end of Catching Fire, it isn't Peeta reacting to Snow's rule changes. It's Snow scrambling to react to Peeta's story choices. The double victor rule, triggered by the lover's narrative. The Walk on Eggshells tour, a response to how beloved they've become. Even the urgency to destroy Peeta in the arena is driven by how effectively he keeps reframing the games as a moral question instead of a blood sport. Snow never realizes the quiet horror of it. The showrunner is following the storyteller's lead, and that imbalance is only going to get worse once Peeta's image survives where his body doesn't. Why Snow keeps looking at Katniss and missing the real threat. Snow thinks he's hunting the wolf. He doesn't realize the real threat is the story the wolf is trapped in. From the moment of the berries, Katniss becomes the flashing red light on his control panel. She breaks the one rule the games are built on: only one victor. At face value, that's a logistical problem. But for Snow, it's worse. She turns a tidy execution into a moral question the whole Capitol has to watch. So he locks onto her. The uprisings in the districts, he reads, "If we burn, you burn with us," straight off her. The Mockingjay dress on Caesar's stage, he sees a weaponized costume, not a weaponized narrative. The arena exploding in the quarter quell, in his mind, that's Katniss literally shooting the heart of his system. Arrow to the force field, arrow to his peace. Here's the real question. Why does a man that paranoid, that meticulous, keep misreading the board? This is where we talk about how symbols work in Snow's mind. He understands clean, controlled icons. White roses to signal presence and power. The games as a yearly ritual of fear. The mockingjay as a brand he did not approve. He knows how to stage a balcony speech or a victory tour. That subtle emotional shifts? A capital audience slowly falling in love with tributes as people? To him, that's noise, not danger. There is a lot to uncover here, because Snow's entire relationship with power is built on predictability. He can measure fear, he can measure hunger. He can't measure Peeta quietly making the capital root for Katniss instead of fearing her, while Katniss is out there sparking rebellion in the districts. Peeta is doing something slower, and for Snow, harder to see. He's reshaping living rooms. Every interview where he's vulnerable, every time he calls Katniss the girl I love, every moment he refuses to play the monster, he's teaching the Capitol to ask why these kids have to die at all. That part matters, because Snow's spectacle only works if the audience believes the tributes are pieces, not people. Snow fixates on Katniss's physical defiance, the arrow at the force field, the arrow at him during the execution in Mockingjay. Those are the moments he understands. Clean cause, bloody effect. So he keeps tightening security, changing rules, bombing arenas. We're going to cover how often he reaches for force, because that's the tool he trusts. Meanwhile, the slow burn revolution is happening through Peeta's words, his proposal before the Quarter Quell, his insistence on honoring Rue and Thresh, even his hijacked interviews where the fear is so raw it exposes the Capitol's cruelty more than it hides it. Snow thinks pain will overwrite Peeta's influence. He doesn't see that the Capitol has already emotionally defected. By the time Snow realizes his audience is no longer on his side, it's too late. And the final proof of that doesn't come from Katniss loosing an arrow. It comes from what Peeta chooses to do in the ruins of the Capitol, when killing her would have been the easier story. Book Peeta, movie Peeta, how adaptation hides Snow's blind spot. And this is where the adaptation quietly steps in and muddies the water. On the page, you're living inside the problem Snow refuses to see. Peeta isn't an accessory to Katniss's story. He's running his own. In the books, every time he opens his mouth, you feel that narrative intelligence. The interview with Caesar where he drops the star-crossed lover's bomb, you're told how carefully he times it, how he reads the room, how he's already thinking about sponsors and the Capitol audience. At face value, it's a crush confession. But on the page, it's a move. In the films, that same moment leans heavily on the visual. The music swells, the camera cuts to Katniss, to Snow watching from above. You feel the romance, sure, but you lose a lot of the sense that Peeta is the one steering the interview, that he's quietly rewriting the rules of the games, while Snow is still treating him as Katniss's +1. That part matters, because it's exactly the blind spot we're talking about. We're going to cover two big trims that really change how you read Snow's failure. First, the ongoing construction of the star-crossed lover's narrative. In the book, Peeta keeps adjusting it. The rooftop, the training scores, the cave. He's explaining his reasoning to Katniss, talking through how the Capitol will react. In the movies, a lot of that dialogue is softened or cut, so the relationship feels more spontaneous, less engineered, as a survival strategy that corners Snow. Second, the Quarter Quell proposal. On the page, Peeta weaponizes the engagement. He doesn't just kneel, he uses that platform to humanize every victor, to turn a spectacle into a eulogy. Snow is being undermined live in front of his own citizens by a boy from District 12 who understands hope and grief better than he does. In the film, the proposal is still powerful, but the sharper lines about the other victors, the systemic cruelty, are trimmed. You get romance again, less revolution. Meanwhile, movie Snow gets more screen time, more explicit menace. We see him in his rose garden in his office, watching broadcasts with that icy calm. But here's the real question. How often does the film Snow actually acknowledge that Peeta's interviews are the thing rotting his control from the inside? He reacts to Katniss's berries, to her dress, to her defiance with the arrow. Peeta's words, they're treated as emotional color. There is a lot to uncover here, because that shift doesn't just affect Snow. It feeds into the fandom habit of treating Katniss as the sole threat and Peeta as support. On screen, Snow's misread of Peeta feels like background noise instead of a deliberate character flaw. So what happens if you re-watch specific scenes with the book Peeta in mind? The beach scene in Catching Fire stops being just a tragic, almost goodbye and becomes a calculated transfer of the Mockingjay narrative away from Katniss's death and onto the hope of her survival. The hijacking broadcasts stop being random outbursts and start to read as Snow trying and failing to overwrite a story Peeta already told too well. And that sets up the real test of Snow's miscalculation. What Peeta does when the cameras are gone and the capital is in ruins. Alternate timeline. What if Snow actually understood Peeta? So let's flip the board for a second. What if Snow actually clocked Peeta as the real problem the moment that star-crossed lovers line hit the air in the 74th games? Because at face value, that interview is just romance, drama, ratings. But here's the real question. What if Snow heard something different? Not a boy in love, but a boy who understood that if you control the story, you control where the capital's sympathy goes. Suddenly, Peeta isn't Katniss's accessory. He's a narrative architect sitting on Snow's own stage. If Snow sees that early, the interventions start immediately. You don't get Peeta and Katniss sharing a train car, a roof, and a mentor. You separate them in the training center, you stagger their schedules, you make sure Caesar Flickerman only has time for one big emotional arc. And it's the girl on fire, not the boy with the bread. Why let the districts watch them build a relationship when you can quietly starve that story of screen time? And if Peeta still shines, then you manage the risk. A rigged mutt attack, a tragic injury on the cornucopia, something that lets the capital mourn a brave, doomed romantic without ever seeing him outthink the games a second time. That part matters because Snow is obsessed with avoiding martyrs, but a version of Snow who understands Peeta also understands that long-term narrative threats are worse than short-term outrage. Fast forward to the Quarter Quell. In canon, Peeta's proposal and his speech about the other victors' children humanize the entire arena. So why would an actually wary Snow hand him another live mic? This is where we talk about media architecture as a weapon. You redesign the format, pre-recorded segments only, heavy editing, no spontaneous questions, Caesar reading from a script. Maybe you flood the airwaves with glossy specials about Peeta's inconsistencies, hinting that his love story is a calculated ploy for fame. And here's the pattern interrupt. Instead of hijacking Peeta purely into a weapon against Katniss, Snow might try to convert him into a model citizen. Imagine a reformed Peeta on state TV, tearfully explaining that the rebellion lied to him, that the capital is the only reason any district has food. Snow understands Peeta's empathy, so he doesn't just break his mind, he targets his connections. To Rue's family, to the other victors, to the viewers who cried over the berries. Does that work? Probably not, but the attempt would look very different. We're going to cover how Peeta's moral center keeps resurfacing, but the key point here is the reason Snow never even tries these smarter moves. His whole theory of human nature is built on fear, hunger, and predictable self-interest. He can't see story or sincerity as real power. And that blindness is the real crack in his regime, because it means even Snow's best-case strategy still underestimates what Peeta becomes once the cameras finally turn off. Hope, fear, and the one variable Snow couldn't model. And this is exactly where Snow's own philosophy walks him into a trap. You remember that scene with Seneca Crane on the balcony? The garden, the drink, the calm little lecture. Hope is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. At face value, it sounds almost reasonable, right? Measure it, portion it out, and you can run an entire country on carefully rationed hope. Here's the real question. What kind of hope does Snow think he's controlling? In his head, it's transactional hope. You fear the reaping, but you hope your district gets extra grain when a victor wins. You hate the games, but you hope your name isn't drawn. You suffer under the capital, but you hope your child might one day live in Victor's village. That part matters because it reveals how Snow imagines people as predictable reactors to pain and reward, always calculating their own odds inside the system, never questioning the system itself. So of course, he allows victors. Of course, he allows love stories. He thinks he's brilliant for it. You want a romance in the arena? Great. As long as it sells ratings, as long as the star-crossed lovers still end with one dead body and one loyal victor, it's just another way to make the games aspirational. We're going to cover how Victor's village weaponizes that promise elsewhere, but the core is the same. A little hope, fenced in by fear. Peeta is the problem because he never treats hope as a private bargain. He doesn't just hope to survive. From the moment he throws Katniss the bread, his hope is relational. He hopes she lives, he hopes she remembers kindness exists. He hopes people in his district are more than pieces on a board. In the 74th game's interviews, he doesn't use his minute to beg for sponsors. He uses it to rewrite the entire narrative. I'm in love with Katniss Everdeen. Suddenly, the romance isn't a capital script. It's his own act of public vulnerability that forces the capital to see two tributes as human beings caught in a story. And notice how Snow's tools start backfiring. The interviews, Peeta turns them into confessionals that spread empathy. The arena, he allies, protects, paints himself into the landscape so the audience has to keep looking for him. The victor's tour, in Catching Fire, he proposes to Katniss on camera, praises other tributes, and keeps sneaking humanity into every speech until the games themselves feel wrong. This is where we talk about why Snow never really understands him. Snow thinks hope is a dial he can turn up or down in each district. Peeta treats hope as something you give away, and once you give it away, it doesn't belong to the capital anymore. It lives in the relationships between people who remember each other. So what happens when that kind of hope collides with Snow's next move, the one that finally convinces him Peeta can be broken? From roses to dandelions, how Peeta quietly ends Snow's story. So when Snow hijacks Peeta and turns him into a weapon, it feels for a second like the white roses have finally won. The scent of control is everywhere. Peeta's face is on capital screens, his words are poisoned, and Katniss's dandelion has been dug up and replanted in Snow's garden. But here's the real question. What happens when the poison doesn't stick to the story the way Snow expects? At face value, the end of Mockingjay looks quiet. No arenas, no roaring crowds, no grand speech where Peeta denounces the capital. Instead, you get a bakery in a ruined district, a boy with a bread tray, and a girl who still wakes up screaming. Snow would call that a narrative downgrade. No spectacle, no use. But there is a lot to uncover here, because this is where we talk about how Peeta quietly ends Snow's story without ever stepping back onto a stage. Snow's symbol has always been the white rose, perfect, curated, and secretly laced with rot. It's beauty that exists to cover up the smell of blood. Katniss's symbol for Peeta is the dandelion in the spring. Stubborn, common, impossible to fully eradicate. One is arranged, the other just appears in the cracks. Which one survives a burned-out District 12? Not the roses. They're a capital import. What actually comes back are the weeds, the things no system planned for. Peeta's endgame is exactly that, unplanned survival. He has been tortured, hijacked, and turned into a weapon whose first instinct is to kill the person he loves. Snow's whole project is to fix Peeta in that role forever. Victim, then threat, then warning. Instead, Peeta goes back to District 12. He bakes. He gardens. He helps rebuild a victor's village that's mostly empty in a district Snow tried to erase. Why does that matter? Because every loaf of bread, every seed in the ground, is Peeta refusing to let the games be the final word on who he is. Snow defines people by their usefulness to his system. You're a victor, a rebel, a prop, a corpse. Peeta breaks that script by choosing to be something Snow has no category for. A survivor who refuses to be primarily a symbol. He mentors quietly. He paints. He jokes with Haymitch. None of that is flashy. All of it is defiant. And then there's his relationship with Katniss. He doesn't just love her. He keeps handing her the dandelion again and again. When she spirals, he asks, real or not real, and helps her sort memory from hijacked terror. That part matters because Snow's entire strategy was to trap both of them in an endless replay of the games. Every nightmare, every broadcast, every rose on her dresser saying, "You never left the arena." Peeta counters with a different narrative. You did leave. We're still here. We can choose. So why is this Snow's ultimate defeat? Because he never understood why anyone would choose kindness and connection after what the capital did to them. His imagination stops at fear. Peeta's doesn't. Long after Snow's body is gone, his regime dies every time Katniss wakes up, smells bread instead of blood, and remembers the dandelion instead of the roses. And once you see that, you have to ask, if Snow misread Peeta this badly, what else about his own system did he fail to understand? So, was Peeta actually Snow's biggest mistake? Or just the one mistake he never realized he'd made? Because when you zoom out, Snow builds an entire system on the assumption that people are predictable. Hunger will make you compliant. Ambition will make you useful. Fear will keep you in line. At face value, that works on most tributes, most districts, most of the capital audience. But Peeta keeps choosing something Snow doesn't have a column for: empathy, authenticity, and this unnervingly sharp narrative intelligence. This is where we talk about misreads. Snow looks at Peeta and sees leverage, a boy you can threaten, hijack parade on television as Katniss's weakness. He never treats him as a strategist in his own right. Yet Peeta is the one who turns a routine interview into the star-crossed lover's story before Katniss even knows there is a script. He's the one who figures out that if you make the Capitol fall in love with a relationship, the games can't end with just one victor without breaking the promise of hope the show is selling. That part matters because it's the same blind spot all the way through. In the Quarter Quell, Snow thinks rolling out the old victors again will remind the districts who's in charge. Peeta responds by proposing on air and eulogizing the other tributes as human beings, not monsters. Every time Snow pushes for spectacle, Peeta quietly rewrites the emotional terms of the scene. Snow keeps trying to control a board of pieces. Peeta keeps talking to the audience holding the board, and when Snow finally does what he always does, torture, hijack, weaponize pain, he still assumes that if you break the body and scramble the fear responses, you've erased the power. But Peeta's real power isn't just in his memories. It's in the relationships he's built, the trust he's banked with Katniss, Haymitch, the other victors, and even the Capitol viewers who once cried over that bread in the rain story. How do you hijack a reputation that's already living in other people's heads? So here's the real question. When we reframe the trilogy, is Katniss actually the whole threat? Or is she the spark Snow sees while Peeta is the slow-burning fuse he misses? Katniss makes the rebellion visible. Peeta makes it emotionally inevitable. Together they topple the Capitol, but Snow only ever truly fears one of them, and it isn't the boy with the bread. Do you think that's his greatest strategic mistake? Or is there a version of this story where Snow takes Peeta seriously and the games end differently? Tell me in the comments if you'd rank Peeta, not Katniss, as Snow's biggest miscalculation, and drop your favorite Peeta outplays Snow moment. Was it the first interview, the beach, the post-hijacking recovery? If you enjoy breaking down characters as strategists inside this system, there is a lot to uncover here. Share this with that one friend who's always defending Peeta in the group chat. And if you want more, we're going to cover Katniss's survival logic and Snow's political design in the next videos. Those are where you really see how this relationship between fear, hope, and story holds the whole Capitol together, until it doesn't.